All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into the world of economics.
Yeah.
And we're going to be looking at some excerpts from Norwegian textbooks
Yeah.
that focus on like the basic kind of fundamental concepts of economics.
Mm.
But what's really fascinating is that in one of these sources, they pose this question: what will we live off of after oil?
Right.
Which I thought was such an interesting jumping off point, because we can really look at these essentials of economics, not just as like theory, but really try and apply them to a real world challenge.
Absolutely. And it's such a relevant question for a country like Norway,
Exactly.
which has, built its economy on this finite resource.
Yeah. So let's maybe start with the basics then.
Okay.
Like, what even is economics?
Yeah. So at its most basic level, economics is the study of how economies function,
Okay.
both at the individual level and as a whole. So, how do people make decisions about what to buy or
Yeah.
what to produce? And then how do those decisions all come together at a larger scale to affect things like economic growth, unemployment,
I see.
inflation, all of those big picture issues?
Okay, so it sounds like it's not just about money then.
Well, money is definitely a big part of it,
Yeah.
but it's more like a tool
Okay.
that we use to kind of represent the value of things.
Mhm.
It's really about how we manage those limited resources
I see.
that we have available, whether that's, natural resources like oil or human capital, the skills and knowledge that people bring.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to get a better picture now.
Good.
One of the things that really jumped out at me from the readings was this idea of incentives.
Oh, yeah. Incentives are fascinating.
Yeah, like it's almost like, well, when you have a really tough task to do,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a reward at the end,
Yeah, totally.
that like feeling that you get that kind of drive you.
That's exactly what incentives are all about. They're those things that motivate us to act in a certain way.
Okay.
And economics tries to understand how these incentives influence our behavior from something as simple as choosing what to have for breakfast to something as complex as, government policy decisions.
So how does this all relate back to that living after oil question?
That's a great question.
Like, does that mean Norway's current economic incentives are kind of, I don't know, messed up because they're so reliant on oil?
Yeah, it's definitely a valid point. I mean, for decades, oil has been such a dominant force in Norway's economy.
Yeah.
And that creates a particular set of incentives for businesses, for workers,
Right.
for the government itself.
So as we're moving into a future where oil may not be as important or as abundant,
Right.
those incentives need to shift somehow.
Absolutely. And that's a key challenge. How do you shift those incentives in a way that promotes a smooth transition
Right.
to a more sustainable economy?
Okay, so in these excerpts, they talk about these two main branches of economics,
Yeah.
microeconomics and macroeconomics.
Mm-hmm.
Is one of those more relevant to this than the other?
I'd say they both play a crucial role.
Okay.
Microeconomics would help us understand how individual businesses and workers in Norway might respond to these changing incentives.
Okay.
So, for example, will they be willing to invest in new technologies,
Yeah.
develop new skills, maybe even switch to entirely different industries?
Right.
Or will they kind of cling to the familiar oil industry, even if it's declining?
So microeconomics is kind of like the individual level then?
Exactly. It's that close-up view of how individual decisions are made.
Okay, and then what about macroeconomics?
Well, macroeconomics takes that big picture perspective. It looks at the overall structure of the economy, things like government policies,
Okay.
trade agreements, international relations, all those factors that kind of set the stage for economic activity.
Oh, it's just like kind of setting the environment.
Exactly. And macroeconomics would help us figure out how to create the right economic environment for those individual changes to be successful.
So we've got these two different lenses then to kind of look at this issue.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
But the excerpts also mention that economists don't always agree,
Yeah, that's the fun part.
even when they're looking at the same data.
Right.
Like, why is that?
Well, economics is not as straightforward as, say, physics or chemistry.
Okay.
It involves human behavior, which is inherently complex
Right. Yeah.
and unpredictable. And there's also often disagreement about which values should be prioritized
Right.
when making economic decisions.
I see.
So you might have two economists looking at the same data but coming to different conclusions because they have different ideas about what's most important.
Can you give me an example of that?
Sure. Imagine Norway decides to put a really heavy tax on oil production
Okay.
to encourage a faster shift to renewable energy.
Mm-hmm.
Some economists might argue that that's the right move, even if it causes some short-term economic hardship
Right.
because they're prioritizing environmental sustainability.
Right.
But other economists might say, no, hold on, a slower transition is better, even if it means delaying the move away from oil because they're prioritizing economic growth and job preservation.
So they're weighing those things differently.
Exactly. And there's no easy answer. It's a matter of values and priorities.
Wow. So it sounds like this living after oil question isn't just an economic question.
Right.
It's also kind of a philosophical one.
Absolutely. It's about what kind of future Norway wants to build for its people and for the planet.
Okay. I think I'm really starting to understand this now.
Great.
It's a lot more nuanced than I thought.
It really is. And that's what makes it so interesting and challenging at the same time.
Yeah. And I guess understanding these fundamentals of economics can help us have those conversations in a more informed and nuanced way.
Absolutely. The more we understand about economics, the better equipped we are to make sense of the world around us.
Okay. Well, this has been a really fascinating discussion so far.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it.
So I think we'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll dive into some more of the specifics of how Norway might approach this challenge.
Sounds good. Yeah, it really is fascinating how, even simple economic choices can get so complicated when you start thinking about all the different values and priorities involved.
Yeah, totally. I'm starting to realize there's a lot more to this than I initially thought.
Definitely.
One thing I wanted to ask about was these economic systems. The excerpts mention those.
Oh, yeah. Economic systems are basically the different ways that societies organize their economic activities.
Okay.
So they determine things like who owns and controls the resources, how goods and services are produced and distributed, and how the benefits of economic activity are shared or not.
So is there like one best economic system then?
That's the big question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no easy answer.
Right.
Different systems have different strengths and weaknesses. It really depends on a society's specific goals and values.
Okay. So what are some of the main economic systems out there?
Well, historically, we've seen a lot of variation, but the excerpts focused on two main types: market economies and centrally planned economies.
Okay, those sound familiar. Can you just remind me how those work again?
Sure. So in a pure market economy, individuals and businesses make most of the economic decisions. They decide what to produce, how to produce it, and who gets to buy it.
Okay.
The government's role is pretty limited. It's mostly about setting the rules of the game and enforcing contracts.
So it's all about individual freedom and competition then?
Yeah, that's the core idea. The thinking is that when businesses have to compete with each other, they're incentivized to innovate, offer lower prices, and provide better quality goods and services.
Okay, that makes sense.
Ultimately, the idea is that this benefits everyone by creating a more efficient and dynamic economy.
And what about centrally planned economies? How do they differ?
Well, in a centrally planned economy, the government takes a much more active role. It controls the means of production, sets prices, and decides how goods and services are distributed. The goal is often to ensure more equality and prevent the kind of wealth disparities that you can see in a pure market economy.
So it's kind of like a top-down approach where the government makes all the big decisions.
Exactly. But here's the catch. Both of these systems, in their pure forms, have limitations. Pure market economies can lead to problems like inequality, environmental damage, and instability.
Right.
And while centrally planned economies might promote greater equality, they often struggle with inefficiency, lack of innovation, and even restrictions on individual freedom.
So it sounds like each system has its own set of trade-offs.
Absolutely. That's why most real-world economies aren't purely market-driven or purely centrally planned. They're a mix of both, what we call mixed economies.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly. The challenge is finding the right balance for a particular society, and that can vary greatly depending on factors like history, culture, and political ideology.
This is kind of reminding me of those disagreements we talked about earlier about how economists don't always agree. It seems like each system reflects a different set of values.
Yeah, you're right on the money there. It's not just about economic efficiency, it's also about what we as a society value most.
So how does Norway fit into all this?
Well, Norway has traditionally leaned towards a mixed economy with a strong social safety net and significant government involvement in key sectors like healthcare and education.
Yep.
But with this living after oil challenge, the question is, does this model need to evolve?
Right, like do they need to maybe shift the balance a bit?
That's something that policymakers and economists are actively debating right now. There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Okay, so we've got these different systems, but how do we actually measure how well an economy is doing?
That's where economic indicators come in. They're like the vital signs of an economy. They give us data on things like economic growth, unemployment, inflation, and trade.
So instead of checking someone's pulse, we're checking the GDP.
Yeah, exactly. GDP, or gross domestic product, is one of the most widely used economic indicators. It measures the total value of goods and services produced in an economy over a certain period. A growing GDP is generally seen as a sign of a healthy economy. But it's not the only indicator that matters.
What are the other ones? What do they tell us?
Well, the unemployment rate, for example, tells us how many people are actively looking for work but can't find it. High unemployment can signal economic trouble,
Right.
while low unemployment suggests a strong job market.
Makes sense. What about inflation?
Inflation measures how quickly prices are rising. A little inflation is normal, but if it gets too high, it can erode people's purchasing power and destabilize the economy.
So basically, we need to keep an eye on all of these indicators to get a full picture of how an economy is doing.
Exactly. It's like going to the doctor for a checkup. You need to look at multiple vital signs to assess your overall health.
And I guess understanding these indicators is especially important for a country like Norway as they figure out their post-oil future.
Absolutely. These indicators can help policymakers track progress, identify potential problems, and make more informed decisions.
You know, at the beginning of this, I thought this living after oil question was just about Norway's economic future. But it's really about their values as a society, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a really insightful observation. Economics isn't just about maximizing profit or achieving the highest GDP growth. It's ultimately about how we as societies choose to use our limited resources to create the kind of world we want to live in.
Yeah, it's like a giant puddle with no single right answer.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so fascinating. The Living After Oil challenge is not unique to Norway. It's a microcosm of the larger questions we're all facing about how to build a sustainable and equitable future in a rapidly changing world.
So where do we even begin to answer these questions?
Well, one way is to apply those economic principles we've been discussing, looking at incentives, analyzing potential trade-offs, and using data to inform our decisions.
That sounds like a good starting point, but I still have this feeling that there are no easy answers here.
You're right. There aren't. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. The more we understand about economics, the better equipped we'll be to engage in these crucial conversations and create the future we want.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to have those tough conversations and be willing to challenge our assumptions about how the world works.
Absolutely. And I think economics can give us the tools to do that in a more informed and constructive way.
Wow, it's amazing how we started with this simple question about Norway
Yeah.
and ended up talking about like the future of society and what we value.
It's true. Economics can seem really dry at first, but when you really get into it, it's all about people.
Right.
It's about the choices we make and how those choices shape the world.
Yeah, so let's bring it back to Norway for a minute. We've talked about these economic systems and incentives and indicators.
Right.
Like, what are some actual things they could do to actually navigate this transition?
Well, one key thing is diversification.
Okay.
They need to reduce their reliance on oil by investing in other sectors.
So, like, what kind of sectors are we talking about?
Well, there are a lot of possibilities.
Okay.
Renewable energy, of course,
Yeah.
sustainable technologies. They could even leverage their existing expertise in areas like fisheries or tourism.
So finding new ways to create value, basically.
Exactly. New sources of wealth that aren't tied to oil.
Right. And it's not just about, like, creating new industries.
Right.
It's also about the people.
Absolutely. Investing in human capital is crucial.
Like, what does that mean exactly?
Education, training, research.
Okay.
Making sure that Norwegians have the skills they need to succeed in this new economy.
Yeah. I remember the excerpts mentioned innovation, too.
Oh, yeah. Innovation is key.
Like, how do they foster that?
Well, research and development are obviously important,
Yeah.
but it's also about creating an environment that encourages entrepreneurship.
Yep.
A culture where people are willing to take risks and try new things.
So are there any examples of countries that have done this successfully?
Like transitioned away from a single resource. There are actually quite a few.
Oh, really?
Like look at Chile, for example. They've made huge strides in diversifying their economy away from copper,
Okay.
or the UK, which has shifted from a manufacturing-based economy to a more service-based one.
Oh, right.
So it's definitely possible.
It's not like a pipe dream.
Not at all. It takes careful planning and strategic investment,
Mm-hmm.
but it can be done.
At the beginning of this, I have to admit I was pretty intimidated by economics.
Yeah, I get that.
But
Yeah.
you've really helped me see it in a new light.
I'm glad to hear that.
Like, it's not just this abstract theoretical thing.
Right.
It's actually a tool for understanding the world.
Exactly. Economics can help us make sense of the choices we make,
Yeah.
the way our societies function, the challenges we face.
So for our listeners out there who are thinking, okay, this is all interesting,
Yeah.
but what does it mean for me?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Oh, okay.
Whether you're an entrepreneur, a policymaker, or just a concerned citizen. Understanding economics can help you make more informed choices,
Right.
advocate for policies you believe in, contribute to building a better world.
And for our listeners in Norway who are facing this challenge head on,
Yeah.
any advice for them?
I'd say embrace the challenge.
Okay.
See it as an opportunity.
Yeah.
It might feel daunting, but it's also a chance to reimagine what's possible,
Right.
to create a future that's both prosperous and sustainable.
Well, that's a great note to end on.
I think so.
I know I'm feeling a lot more optimistic about the future now,
Yeah, me too.
even with all the challenges we faced.
That's the beauty of economics. It's not just about understanding the problems. It's about finding solutions
Yeah.
and building a better world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of economics. We hope you've learned something new and are feeling inspired to explore this fascinating field even further.